Everyone thought I was just a disgruntled data analyst, another cog spitting venom after being chewed up by the corporate machine. But nobody knew I had a copy of their hidden files. They called it corporate espionage. Was it? My name is Alex, and yes, I quit my job at Innovatech. And yes, a week later, a courier served me with a lawsuit thick enough to stop a door, accusing me of violating a non-compete clause so draconian it basically forbade me from breathing the same air as another tech company. They were suing me into oblivion for the simple act of wanting out, claiming I was a flight risk with proprietary knowledge. They weren't wrong about the knowledge part, but they had no idea just how much I truly had. I can still picture my old boss, Mr. Sterling, his smile as thin and sharp as a paper cut, telling me I was part of the family. That family, it turned out, was the kind that breaks your legs if you try to leave. He was the one who signed off on the lawsuit. I could feel his vindictive satisfaction through the legalese. His signature was probably as neat and emotionless as the code I used to write for him. The only person in my corner now was Sarah, my lawyer, a woman whose exhaustion was matched only by her tenacity. "They're trying to make an example of you, Alex," she'd told me, her brow furrowed over stacks of legal documents that were rapidly colonizing her office. "They want to scare anyone else who's thinking of jumping ship." But as Sarah strategized about how to fight their claims of breach of contract, I kept thinking about the encrypted drive in my desk drawer. I hadn't taken the files to compete. I'd copied them as insurance, a gut feeling that something was deeply rotten at Innovatech. Now, looking at the lawsuit that aimed to ruin me, I realized they weren't just insurance anymore. They were ammunition. Innovatech wanted to sue me for leaving? Fine. I was about to countersue them for everything they'd done to stay in business. My hands were shaking as I placed the lawsuit back on my small kitchen table. It felt heavier than paper, like it was cast in lead. Sarah was right. They were making an example of me. But the real weight wasn't the legal battle. It was the photo on my fridge, held up by a cheap magnet. It was me and my little sister, Jenna, grinning at the camera during her last hospital discharge. Her medical bills were a mountain, and my Innovatech salary had been the climbing gear. Without it, and with a lawsuit designed to bleed me dry, we were facing an avalanche. Jenna was the reason I'd put up with Sterling's family for so long. She was the reason I couldn't afford to lose. She was the stake in this game I hadn't even known I was playing. My phone buzzed, shattering the quiet dread. The caller ID was blocked. I almost ignored it, but a cold premonition made me answer. "Alex," a voice oozed, as smooth and toxic as an oil slick. It was Sterling. "I trust you received our correspondence." A bit of a misunderstanding, I'm sure we can agree. I said nothing, my knuckles white around the phone. "Look," he continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "I'm willing to be generous. Drop this foolishness, sign an NDA that actually has teeth this time, and we can make this all go away. Think of it as a severance package." "There's nothing to think about," I managed to say, my voice tight. A soft, humorless chuckle came through the speaker. "Oh, I think there is. You should think about what's important. Stability. The ability to provide for loved ones. I hear Jenna's doing so much better. It would be a shame if her support system suddenly collapsed." My blood ran cold. It wasn't just a threat. It was a message. He knew. He had looked into my life, found my weak spot, and put his finger right on it. That was the moment the fear curdled into pure, unadulterated rage. This wasn't about a non-compete anymore. This was about a man who would threaten a sick kid to get his way. He'd made a fatal error. He thought he was showing me the cage, but he was really showing me the key. I hung up without another word and walked to my desk drawer. My fingers closed around the cool metal of the encrypted drive. This was never just insurance. It was a time bomb. And Mr. Sterling, with his paper-cut smile and veiled threats, had just handed me the detonator. He had no idea what was in the hidden files I'd copied. He thought it was just code and project specs. He didn't know I had the proof of his generosity, the backroom deals, the doctored safety reports, the real cost of Innovatech's success. They were suing me? Fine. I was about to show them, and the whole world, what their family was really built on. They wanted to ruin my life, but they have no idea I'm about to ruin their whole company. If you want to follow my story and see how I take them down from the inside out, make sure you like and subscribe, because this is just the beginning. The rage from Sterling's call simmered for 2 days, a low-grade fever that left me paranoid. Every car that slowed on my street, every unfamiliar footstep in the apartment hallway sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that Sterling's tactics were purely psychological. He was a man of contracts and backroom handshakes, not crowbars and ski masks. I was wrong. I came home from a tense meeting with Sarah to find my apartment door slightly ajar. A sliver of blackness against the beige hallway wall. My heart hammered against my ribs. I'd locked it. I knew I had. I pushed the door open, my hand trembling, and the scene that greeted me stole the air from my lungs. My small apartment had been ransacked, not by a common burglar. My laptop was still on the coffee table, the TV still on the wall. This was a search. A professional, brutal search. Cushions were slashed, books swept from their shelves, my mattress flipped and gutted. My desk was the epicenter of the destruction. Drawers were pulled out and splintered on the floor, their contents scattered like confetti. They hadn't found it. I knew, with a certainty that cut through the panic, that they hadn't found what they were looking for. The encrypted drive wasn't in the desk. After Sterling's call, I'd moved it. My gaze fell upon the wreckage of my personal life, the violation of my sanctuary, and I felt something snap. This wasn't a lawsuit anymore. This was war. Sterling had sent his goons into my home, the same home where I cared for my sister on her good days, the place that was supposed to be our refuge. My fear, which had been a cold knot in my stomach, flash froze into something solid and sharp. There was no going back, there was no negotiation, no settlement, no walking away. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. They had taken their corporate intimidation and brought it crashing into my life, threatening not just my career, but my physical safety. They had done it because they were terrified of what was on that drive. They were terrified of the hidden files. I walked numbly past the destruction, my feet crunching on shattered picture frames. I went to the fridge and looked at the photo of me and Jenna, miraculously untouched. Her smile, so full of life, was a stark contrast to the chaos around us. They had come into her space too. That thought alone was enough to extinguish the last flicker of fear and replace it with a diamond-hard resolve. I knelt down, pried up a loose floorboard beneath the refrigerator, a secret spot I'd found when I first moved in, and pulled out the small metallic drive. It felt warm in my hand, a concentration of power. Sterling wanted to play rough? He had no idea what he had just unleashed. He thought a break-in would scare me into submission. Instead, he had just guaranteed his own destruction. My first call wasn't to Sarah. It wasn't even to check on Jenna. My first, naive, law-abiding citizen call was to 911. As I waited, drive clutched in my hand, I surveyed the wreckage. It was a violation so personal it felt like a physical assault. I had this foolish, flickering hope that bringing in the authorities, the official arbiters of right and wrong, would somehow make it real. That they would see the slashed couch and splintered drawers and understand the terror that came with them. 2 officers arrived, a man and a woman, their expressions a practiced blend of boredom and professional sympathy. They walked through the apartment with heavy footsteps, their presence feeling almost as intrusive as the initial break-in. So, anything missing? The male officer, a Sergeant Miller according to his name tag, asked, clicking his pen. TV, laptop, cash, jewelry? No, nothing's missing, I said, my voice hoarse. That's the point. They weren't here to steal, they were here to find something. He glanced at his partner. It was a look I would come to understand meant, we've got a live one. Find what, sir? I hesitated, the weight of the explanation settling on me. I'm in a legal dispute with my former employer, Innovatech. My boss, a man named Marcus Sterling, he's been threatening me. I think he sent someone to find a computer drive. Miller stopped writing and looked at me directly. His eyes were flat, devoid of interest. You think? Do you have any proof of that? Any witnesses who saw Mr. Sterling's men breaking down your door? No, but he called me. He threatened my family. And then this happens. It's not a coincidence. I could hear the desperation creeping into my voice and I hated it. Sir, we're investigating a B&E with vandalism. What you're talking about is a civil matter, he said. The words, a perfectly constructed wall. Unless you have concrete evidence linking Mr. Sterling to this specific crime, he's just a name in your statement. We'll dust for prints, but in cases like this, they're usually wearing gloves. I stared at him, my hope shriveling. They were seeing a simple crime scene, a mess to be documented. They couldn't see the invisible fingerprints of corporate power all over it. They couldn't comprehend that the thing the intruders were looking for, the hidden files, was more valuable than anything else in my apartment and more dangerous to Sterling than a vault full of cash. How could I explain that to a man with a notepad and a list of standard questions? So that's it. You write a report and leave? My frustration was boiling over. They came into my home. They tore it apart. They did it to terrorize me, and you're telling me it's just a civil matter. We'll investigate, the female officer said, her tone a little gentler but no less dismissive. But you need to be realistic, sir. We'll give you a case number for your insurance. Insurance. The word was so absurd it was almost funny. There was no insurance policy for this kind of violation. After they left, I stood alone in the quiet, clutching a slip of paper with a case number on it. It felt like a receipt for my own disillusionment. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as designed, protecting the powerful from the accusations of the powerless. There would be no justice coming from a police report. No cavalry was on its way. The fear I'd felt earlier returned, colder this time, because now I knew with absolute certainty I was completely and utterly on my own. The slip of paper with the case number felt flimsy and insulting. It was a bureaucratic pat on the head, a token for my trouble. I crumpled it in my fist, the sharp edges digging into my palm. The two officers had been gone for less than 10 minutes, but the silence they left behind was louder than their platitudes. The system wasn't just failing me, it was actively ignoring me, looking the other way, while a man like Sterling used his power like a cudgel. I was on my own. The thought, which had been terrifying before, was now oddly clarifying. There were no rules. Not for them, and so not for me. My first instinct was to call Sarah and tell her everything, but my hand hovered over my phone. Before I could strategize, before I could plan my war, I needed to know the most important front was secure. I needed to hear Jenna's voice. I took a deep breath, trying to purge the tremor from my own, and dialed her number. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey, big brother, did you finally decide to take a day off?" Her voice was bright, one of her good day voices, and a wave of relief washed over me. Something like that. I lied, forcing a lightness I didn't feel. Just calling to check in. "How are you feeling?" "Pretty good, actually. Nurse Carol says my numbers are looking great." We chatted for a few minutes about her physical therapy, about a funny movie she'd watched. The simple normalcy of it was a balm on my frayed nerves. I was about to hang up, feeling a little of the tension ease from my shoulders, when she added, "Oh, but there was a weird thing today. Kind of annoying." My spine went rigid. "Weird how?" "My appointment with Dr. Aris for next week, the pre-scan consult for the new treatment? The hospital called and canceled it. They said there was a problem with the insurance pre-authorization and that it might take a few weeks to sort out." The air in my wrecked apartment turned to ice. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a message, delivered with the cold, sterile precision of a surgeon's scalpel. Sterling wasn't sending thugs with crowbars anymore. He was sending whispers down bureaucratic hallways. He was manipulating the very system I needed to keep Jenna alive, tangling her care in red tape so thick I'd never be able to cut through it. This was so much worse than a break-in. He had found a way to hurt me without leaving a single fingerprint, a way to make my sister a casualty in a war she didn't even know was being fought. "Alex, you still there?" Jenna's voice was laced with concern. Yeah, I'm here," I said, my voice a strained whisper. "Don't worry about it, Jen. I'll sort it out. It's just a clerical error. I'll make some calls." "Okay, she said, though I could tell she heard the new tension in my voice. Love you. I love you too, I said, and hung up. The phone slipped from my numb fingers and clattered onto the floor. I stared at the encrypted drive still clutched in my other hand. The police report was useless. A lawsuit was just paper. But this was different. He had reached into the one sanctuary I had left, the fragile bubble of my sister's health, and threatened to pop it. He was leveraging her life against my silence. The last of my fear burned away, leaving behind something cold and absolute. I was done reacting. I was done being the victim. I picked up my phone, my movements sharp and certain, and dialed Sarah. She answered on the first ring, sounding exhausted. Alex, what's wrong? I've been trying to reach you. They broke into my apartment, Sarah, I said, my voice flat and devoid of the panic she probably expected. What? Oh my God, are you okay? Did you call the police? I did. They gave me a case number, I said, the words tasting like ash. But that doesn't matter now. He just went after Jenna. I quickly explained a canceled appointment, the insurance issue that was no issue at all. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. He wouldn't, she finally breathed. That's monstrous. That's what I'm up against, I said. The system won't help me. The police can't, and he's proving he can turn any other part of it against me. So we're done playing defense. We're done with the non-compete. It's time to show them what this is really about. I looked down at the drive in my hand. When I left Innovatech, I made a copy of something. Insurance, I called it. It's proof. Proof of everything. The doctored safety reports, the bribes, the financial crimes, all of it. They call them the hidden files internally. And Sterling knows I have them. That's what this is all about. He's terrified they'll get out. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had lost its exhaustion, replaced by the same cold resolve I felt coursing through my own veins. Get to my office, Alex. Bring the drive. If Sterling wants a war, we'll give him one he can never win. The drive to Sarah's office was the longest 20 minutes of my life. Every car in my rearview mirror was a potential tail, every traffic light a new opportunity for ambush. I drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting on my jacket pocket, where the encrypted drive felt like a small, dense star, radiating a dangerous energy. The city lights blurred past, but I saw nothing but the cold, clinical cancellation notice for Jenna's appointment. It was an execution order, signed with invisible ink. When I arrived, Sarah didn't greet me with platitudes or sympathy. She met me at her office door and locked it behind me, her movements crisp and efficient. Her office, usually an organized chaos of case files, was clear. A single laptop sat on her polished desk. The exhaustion was gone from her face, replaced by a focused intensity that was almost frightening. Let's see it, she said, her voice low. I slid the drive across the desk. She plugged it into her laptop, which I noticed was not connected to the office Wi-Fi. A password prompt appeared. I typed in the long, complex key, a string of characters based on the date of Jenna's first remission, and the drive's contents bloomed onto the screen. For the next hour, there was no sound but the quiet clicking of Sarah's keyboard as she navigated the labyrinth I had created. She opened file after file. The falsified environmental impact reports for Project Nightingale, the internal emails detailing the bribes paid to city inspectors, the memos from Sterling himself ordering engineers to bypass safety protocols on a consumer product to beat a competitor to market. She saw the real cost of Innovatech's soaring stock price, tallied in hushed-up injuries and backroom deals. Finally, she looked up, her eyes wide with the enormity of it. Alex, it's a corporate death sentence. He threatened my sister's life, Sarah, I said, my voice quiet but hard. I want to bury him with it. A slow, cold smile touched her lips. It was a terrifying thing to see on her usually weary face. Oh, we're not just going to bury him. We're going to make him dig his own grave. She leaned forward. Filing a lawsuit is slow. It gives him time to spin, to hide, to shred. We need to detonate this, not just light a fuse. Your deposition for the non-compete suit is scheduled for Friday." I nodded. I'd been dreading it for weeks. "We won't try to postpone it," she continued, her eyes gleaming. "We'll walk right in. You'll answer their questions. And then, when it's my turn to question you, I'm going to ask you a very specific question. I'm going to ask you why you believe Innovatech is so determined to silence you." She tapped a finger on the laptop screen. "And you're going to tell them about the hidden files. With Sterling in the room, under oath. We'll have a court reporter documenting every word. We'll have everything ready to file with the SEC and the district attorney the second he perjures himself, which he will. It was a window of opportunity, a legal ambush. A moment where the system, for a split second, could be turned into a weapon against the very people who knew how to manipulate it. There was no hiding, no leaking to the press and hoping for the best. This was a direct, head-on confrontation. He'll be cornered. I breathed, understanding the brutal elegance of it. A cornered rat, Sarah confirmed, will either bite or confess. Either way, we win. The 2 days leading up to the deposition were a blur of preparation. We didn't sleep. Sarah drilled me, preparing me for the feigned innocence, the outrage, the threats that would come from Innovatech's legal team. We prepared exhibits, cross-referencing files from the drive with dates and names, creating an undeniable chain of evidence. Now, I sit in a sterile, windowless conference room. The air is thick, with the scent of expensive suits and quiet hostility. Sterling's lawyers, a trio of sharks in tailored armor, sit opposite me. And there, at the head of the table, is Marcus Sterling himself. He gives me a small, condescending nod, his paper-cut smile firmly in place. He thinks he's here to watch his lawyers tear me apart. He thinks he's won. He has no idea he's attending his own execution. The court reporter swears me in, her voice a monotone drone. The lead counsel for Innovatech begins his questioning. I answer calmly, just as Sarah and I rehearsed. An hour passes, then 2. Finally, their lawyer says, "No further questions for the witness at this time." It's Sarah's turn. She gives me a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. This is it. The air crackles with anticipation. Sterling leans back in his chair, looking bored, confident. He has no idea the world is about to end. Sarah clears her throat, her eyes fixed on me, and the first domino is about to fall. "Mr. Sterling's company is suing you for breach of contract," Sarah began, her voice calm and measured, a stark contrast to the tension in the room. "They claim you represent a threat to their business. Is that true?" "Yes," I said, my voice steady, "but not for the reasons they've stated." Sterling's lead lawyer, a man with a face like a clenched fist, started to object. "Relevance, counsel?" "It is the very definition of relevant," Sarah shot back without looking at him. "My client's state of mind is at issue. Please, Alex, continue. Why do you believe Innovatech is so determined to silence you?" This was it. I took a breath and looked past the lawyers, my gaze landing on Sterling. His smug smirk was still there, but his eyes were watchful. Because, when I left, I took a copy of their most sensitive internal records, a collection of documents they refer to internally as the hidden files. The smirk vanished. It didn't slide off his face. It shattered. Sterling sat bolt upright, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of the polished table. His lawyers exchanged panicked glances. "And what do these files contain?" Sarah prompted gently. "They contain evidence of widespread criminal activity," I said, the words coming out colder and harder than I'd intended. "They contain, for example, the complete, unredacted data for a project codenamed Nightingale. Innovatech was contracted to build a new data center, and they sold the city on a green initiative. But these files show they falsified the environmental impact reports. They detail how they secretly and illegally dumped thousands of gallons of industrial solvents into the groundwater to save on disposal costs." Objection. "This is slanderous and has no bearing on a non-compete dispute," one of the lawyers barked. "On the contrary," Sarah countered smoothly, "it establishes motive for witness intimidation, including the break-in at my client's apartment and the sudden, unexplained cancellation of his sister's life-saving medical treatment. The room went silent. I continued, my mind's eye picturing the spreadsheets and reports on the drive. The files contained the exact dates of the dumping, the chemical compositions, the falsified water quality tests submitted to the EPA, and the names of the executives who signed off on it, including Mr. Sterling. I was in my element now, the data flowing through my memory. This was my skill. Not just copying files, but understanding them, seeing the story they told in rows and columns. The primary contamination spike was in the spring of 2021. The coordinates in the report placed the highest concentration of runoff in the aquifer that serves the East Milton suburb. My voice caught in my throat. A sudden, visceral cold spread through my chest, so intense it felt like my heart had been submerged in ice water. East Milton. The dates. The chemicals, known carcinogens. I had read those facts a dozen times while preparing with Sarah, but I had seen them only as data points, as proof of corporate malfeasance. Now, sitting across from the man who had threatened my sister's life, the data points suddenly snapped into a new, horrific alignment. A pattern I had never seen before. East Milton was where Jenna and I grew up. It's where she was living when she first got sick. In the summer of 2021. The room, the lawyers, Sterling's furious face, it all faded into a roaring tunnel. My brain, the analytical engine I'd honed for years at Innovatech, was screaming at me. The connection wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't just that he was threatening her now. It was that he had already poisoned her. The cancer cluster the local news had briefly reported on, the one they dismissed as a statistical anomaly. It wasn't an anomaly. It was Project Nightingale. My rehearsed composure crumbled to dust. I looked up from the table, my eyes finding Sterling's. The hatred I felt was so pure, so absolute, it was a physical force. He saw the shift in my face. He saw the dawning, soul-crushing realization. "It was you," I whispered, the sound raw. The court reporter leaned forward, her fingers poised. "The East Milton aquifer. That's my sister. That's Jenna." My voice rose, cracking with a grief and rage so profound it shook the room. It wasn't just fraud. It wasn't just dumping. You knew the hidden files. They don't just contain the environmental data. They contain the health assessment reports from the town, the spike in rare lymphomas. You knew you had created a cancer cluster, and you paid politicians to bury it. You gave my sister cancer. The accusation hung in the air, vibrating with monstrous weight. Sterling's lawyers were frantically trying to call for a recess to stop the record, but it was too late. Sterling's face had gone from red to a waxy, bloodless white. His mask of corporate power had been ripped away, and underneath was nothing but a cornered ghoul. "That community was a statistically acceptable risk," he snarled, the words erupting from him, a venomous, involuntary confession. "A necessary cost for progress." The room fell into a dead, shocked silence, broken only by the frantic, rhythmic clicking of the court reporter's keyboard, capturing every last syllable of his monstrous justification. He had said it, under oath. He had confessed. "I had walked in here to save my career and my sister's future. But my skill, the one they had paid me for and were now suing me over, had just uncovered a truth 1,000 times worse. I had won, but the victory tasted like poison and ash." The clicking of the keys was the only sound in the universe. It was a woodpecker drilling into my skull, etching Sterling's words into my brain. "Type 2 Pauling die, statistically acceptable risk." The phrase was so grotesquely corporate, so devoid of humanity, that it broke through my rage and left me in a state of chilling, empty clarity. The adrenaline that had propelled me through the accusation evaporated, and the weight of what I had just learned, what I had just proven, came crashing down. I had won. And in doing so, I had discovered that the monster I was fighting was infinitely more terrible than I had ever imagined. Sterling's lawyers were shouting, a cacophony of "strike that from the record" and badgering the witness, but their words were meaningless noise. Sterling himself just stared at me, his face a mask of waxy fury. He had been so used to the system protecting him that he had forgotten how to function without its shield. He opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing to say. The court reporter's fingers had already carved his confession into history. "We're done here," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the chaos like a razor. She stood up, placing a firm, grounding hand on my shoulder. She looked not at Sterling, but at the court reporter. "Please prepare a certified copy of the transcript immediately. We will be taking it, along with our other evidence, directly to the district attorney's office." The threat, now made real, sucked the air from the room. One of Sterling's lawyers, the one with the clenched fist face, started to bluster about procedure, but Sarah just held up a hand. "Save it. Your client just confessed, under oath, to a conspiracy that resulted in a public health crisis. This is no longer a civil matter." She turned to me, her eyes holding a mixture of grim victory and profound sympathy. "Come on, Alex, let's go." I moved like an automaton, my legs stiff and unsteady. Sarah guided me out of the conference room and into the quiet, sterile hallway. The door clicked shut behind us, sealing Sterling and his panicked team in their self-made tomb. I leaned against the wall, the cool plaster a stark contrast to the fire in my gut. I could still hear the phantom clicking of the keyboard. Sarah didn't ask if I was okay. She knew I wasn't. Instead, she pulled out her phone, her movements sharp and decisive. She scrolled through her contacts and hit a number. "Assistant D.A. Reynolds, please. It's Sarah Jenkins. Tell him it's about Innovatech." There was a brief pause. "David, it's Sarah. Remember that case I told you was coming? It just broke, wide open." I listened, detached, as she laid it out in concise, legal terms. She mentioned the hidden files, the irrefutable data, and the new, explosive development. "We have him, David. A full confession. In a deposition. It's on the record. He called a cancer cluster A, statistically acceptable risk. Yes, I'll send the transcript over the second it's ready. You'll have everything you need to file charges and freeze their assets by the end of the day." This was it. The system that had offered me a useless case number for my ransacked apartment was now being wielded like a sledgehammer. The police hadn't been the answer. The answer was a good lawyer with the right evidence. Forcing the hand of a prosecutor who could not ignore a confession gift-wrapped with a mountain of proof, the gears were finally turning. Not because of some abstract sense of justice, but because we had made it impossible for them not to. After she hung up, Sarah looked at me, her professional mask softening. "They'll issue a warrant for Sterling's arrest this afternoon," she said quietly. "It's over, Alex. You won." I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor, the expensive carpet doing little to cushion the blow. I looked at my hands. They were trembling. "What did I win, Sarah?" I asked, my voice hollow. "I found out the man who was threatening my sister's treatment is the same man who made her sick in the first place. I used the hidden files to prove it. I got the confession." I finally looked up at her, the full, crushing weight of the truth settling in my soul. But she's still sick. And now I know why. Now I have to live with knowing why. Sarah's words about the warrant barely registered. The ride back to my apartment was a silent, gray blur. I don't remember her saying goodbye or me getting out of the car. I found myself standing in the middle of my ransacked living room, the key still in the lock behind me. The slashed cushions and splintered drawers were exactly as I'd left them. Before, the mess had filled me with a cold, hard resolve. Now it just felt like a fitting backdrop to the ruin in my mind. I didn't clean. I couldn't. I walked through the debris and sat on the edge of my gutted mattress, the springs groaning under my weight. The deposition played on a continuous, tormenting loop in my head. It wasn't the victory I saw. It wasn't Sterling's shocked face or the panic of his lawyers. It was the moment before, the moment the data points connected. Kimes East Milton. Summer 2021. Rare lymphomas. The cold, analytical facts I had weaponized. My greatest strength, my ability to see the patterns in the noise, the story in the data, had become an instrument of my own torture. I had prided myself on that skill, honed it for years at Innovatech. It was the reason I'd been able to assemble the hidden files into an unshakable case. And that same skill was what had just drawn a perfect, straight line from a corporate memo to my sister's hospital bed. I started to shake. A deep, uncontrollable tremor that began in my chest and radiated out to my fingertips. *A. Statistically acceptable risk. The words were a brand on my soul. Jenna wasn't just a victim of circumstance, of a random genetic lottery. She was a data point on one of Sterling's risk assessment charts. Her pain, her fear, her fight, it was all just a rounding error in his pursuit of profit. Sleep, when it finally came, was no escape. It was a descent. I dreamt of drowning in a river of numbers, each one a chemical compound from the environmental reports. I saw spreadsheets where the row headers were the names of my childhood neighbors, and the cells were filled with dates of their diagnoses. And at the very bottom, highlighted in red, was Jenna's name. I would wake up gasping, my heart hammering, the phantom image of the hidden files burned onto the back of my eyelids. They weren't my insurance policy anymore. They were my curse. The proof I had sought was now the knowledge I could never unknow. My phone rang sometime in the gray light of dawn. It was Sarah. Her voice was crisp, energized. The DA filed the charges. Sterling's in custody, bail was denied. They've frozen all of Innovatech's domestic assets pending the investigation. We're already being contacted by a dozen other families from the East Milton area. This is going to be the biggest corporate malfeasance case in a decade, Alex. We did it. 0 times, we did it. 0 times the words landed with a dull thud. I was staring at the photo on my fridge, the one of me and Jenna. Her smile felt like an accusation. Alex, are you there? He called her a statistic, Sarah. I whispered, my voice raw from the nightmares. The energy in her voice vanished, replaced by a deep sigh. I know. It was monstrous. I'm the one who found it, I said, the guilt a physical weight in my throat. That data, it was in the hidden files the whole time. I looked at it for weeks. I saw the location, the dates, the cancer cluster reports. I saw it all, but I didn't see it until he was sitting right there. Until he threatened her. How could I not see it? You were looking for a crime to fight a lawsuit, Alex. Not the origin story of your family's worst tragedy, she said gently. You can't blame yourself for that. But I did. I was the data analyst, the one who saw the whole picture. And I had been blind. The drive was still on the floor where I'd dropped my jacket. I stared at the small piece of metal. It held the truth that had set me free, and the truth that had just imprisoned me in a new, more terrible way. I had won. Sterling was going to jail. Innovatech would likely be dismantled. Jenna's medical bills would be the least of our worries. I had achieved everything I set out to do. And all I could think about was how I was going to look my sister in the eye, knowing that the poison that was killing her had a name, a date, and a price tag I had uncovered myself. I couldn't stay in the apartment. The air was thick with the ghosts of my own discovery, the silence punctuated by the phantom clicks of that keyboard. Sarah's words, Poshkol trustily, Poshkol, we did it, were meant to be a comfort, but they felt like an indictment. We did it. I did it. I found the monster, and it was so much bigger than I knew. My guilt was a paralytic, and I knew if I stayed on that mattress, it would swallow me whole. I needed to move. I needed to act. My mind snagged on a memory, a face. Sergeant Miller, his expression of bored dismissal, his pen clicking, asterisk, a civil matter. The words, which had been a brick wall then, were now a target. He was the first domino in the system that had failed me, the first person who had looked at my terror and told me it wasn't his problem. I drove to the precinct, my hands steady on the wheel for the first time in days. There was no fear, only a hollow, ringing purpose. The news must have broken. A CEO of a Fortune 500 company arrested in a downtown law office? It would be everywhere. I was counting on it. I walked into the station, the smell of stale coffee and disinfectant the same as before. I went to the front desk. I need to speak with Sergeant Miller, I said. My name is Alex. The officer at the desk didn't look up from his computer. Is he expecting you? No, I said, but you can tell him it's about the Innovatech case and the B&E at my apartment, the one he dismissed as a civil matter. The officer's head snapped up. His eyes widened slightly. He recognized the name. He picked up his phone and spoke in a low murmur. A minute later, Sergeant Miller appeared from a hallway, his face a mixture of confusion and annoyance. The annoyance faded when he saw me. He remembered. He led me to a small, grim interrogation room. "Look, sir, I heard about what happened with Mr. Sterling. That's a hell of a thing." "It is," I agreed, remaining standing. "A hell of a thing that started with a break-in you couldn't be bothered to investigate properly. You gave me a case number for my insurance." I pulled the crumpled slip of paper from my pocket and flattened it on the metal table between us. "You told me I needed concrete evidence. You asked if I had witnesses who saw Sterling's men breaking down my door." He shifted his weight, his professional calm beginning to fray. "We followed procedure, sir. We don't have the resources to—" The thing they were looking for. I cut him off, my voice dangerously quiet. "The computer drive." It contained evidence that Marcus Sterling's company poisoned the groundwater in East Milton. It created a cancer cluster. It's why he was so desperate to get it back. It's why he was threatening me. It's why he sent men to my home. I leaned forward, my hands flat on the cool metal. "Your B&E with vandalism was accessory to mass negligent homicide. That's not a civil matter, is it, Sergeant?" The color drained from his face. He stared at the case number on the table, then back at me. The bored cop was gone, replaced by a man staring into a professional abyss. He saw it. He saw the thread he had refused to pull and where it had led. "You looked at me like I was a paranoid crank," I continued, the coldness in my voice absolute. "You and your partner, you had your little look that said, 'So we've got a live one.' You did your paperwork and left me alone in my wrecked apartment to face a monster. Because the system you work for is designed to see a mess, not a message. It's designed to protect men like Sterling by dismissing men like me." He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. There was no apology, but I saw something better in his eyes. Shame. The sickening realization that he had been a cog in the machine that enabled the horror. That was my victory here. Not revenge, but forcing a piece of the system to look at its own reflection. I left him standing there and went to meet Sarah at the DA's office. Assistant DA David Reynolds, a man with tired eyes but a shark smile, greeted us not as a victim and his lawyer, but as conquering heroes. We sat in a conference room, and this time the air wasn't hostile. It was electric. "The hidden files are a roadmap, David," I said, my voice resonating with a new authority. I was no longer just a witness. I was the architect of Sterling's downfall, and I was here to make sure they didn't just demolish the house but tore out the foundations. Sterling is the head of the snake, but he had help. There are city inspectors on his payroll. There are state environmental regulators who signed off on falsified reports. I directed them to specific folders on the copy of the drive they now possessed. I pointed out the chains of emails, the offshore payment records, the doctored safety certifications. I wasn't just giving them evidence. I was giving them a strategy. "I don't just want Sterling," I said, my gaze unwavering. "I want every single person who took a check to look the other way. I want the system that allowed a statistically acceptable risk to become a reality for my sister and dozens of other families to be held accountable." I paused, letting the weight of my next words settle. "And when you seize Innovatech's assets, a significant portion needs to be mandated for two things: a medical trust for every victim of the East Milton cluster, and a real, comprehensive cleanup of the aquifer. Not a press release cleanup, a real one." Reynolds looked at Sarah, who simply nodded. "He's not asking, David," she said. "The public outcry when this story fully breaks will demand nothing less. Alex is giving you the chance to be the one who delivers it." Reynolds leaned back, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Okay, Alex," he said. "Let's go hunting." Walking out of that building, I felt the first glimmer of something other than guilt or rage. It was purpose. I hadn't saved Jenna from the poison, but I would burn the whole corrupt world down to make sure she and all the others got justice. I still didn't know how I was going to face her, but for the first time, I knew what I would do for her. I would make sure her name, and the names of all the victims, became a fire that purified the very system that had once dismissed them as a rounding error. 3 months. For 3 months, the slashed cushions and splintered drawers of my apartment remained exactly as the goons had left them. It was a monument to my rage, then to my guilt. I'd walk past the wreckage to get to the fridge, the mess a constant, physical reminder of the truth I had unearthed. But last week, I threw it all out. I hired a junk removal service and watched them haul away the gutted mattress and broken picture frames. Then I painted the walls myself, a clean, quiet gray. I bought a new couch. It's not much, but it's a start. It's my space again. The world knows the name Innovatech now, not as a titan of industry, but as a synonym for corporate poison. Sterling is awaiting trial, buried under a mountain of indictments. Reynolds' team, armed with the roadmap I gave them, arrested 2 EPA officials and a half-dozen city inspectors. The system I had to force into motion is now a relentless, self-perpetuating machine of justice. Sarah, no longer just my lawyer, is now the lead counsel for a class action lawsuit representing over 200 families from East Milton. I don't have a job, not a real one. My days are spent in a temporary office Sarah rented, surrounded by whiteboards and stacks of documents. My official title is consultant, but what I really am is the keeper of the story. I'm the one who knows the dark heart of the hidden files better than anyone. My guilt hasn't vanished. I don't think it ever will, but I've learned to make it productive. I've channeled it into this new work, into ensuring no one else gets written off as a rounding error. This morning, I sat at a laptop, the screen filled with columns and rows. It looked like the work I used to do at Innovatech, but it felt entirely different. I was cross-referencing old property deeds from East Milton with hospital admission records and school enrollment lists from the early 2000s. I was building a new database, not of chemical compounds, but of people. Families who moved away before the cancer cluster was identified. Kids who went off to college and got sick. Their cases never linked back to the town where they grew up. My fingers flew across the keyboard, my mind falling into that familiar, focused trance. I saw the patterns, the connections, the faint threads of data that told a human story. A name on a 20-year-old deed would match a name on a medical record in a different state, years later. And for a moment, the old, cold dread washed over me. This was the same skill. This was how I'd found Jenna in the data. But then, I looked up from the screen. Across the room, a young paralegal was on the phone with a man whose wife had died 5 years ago, telling him he wasn't alone, that there was a reason, and that help was coming. I wasn't just finding victims anymore, I was finding people who deserved justice. The skill was the same, but I was no longer using it to map out a tragedy. I was using it to chart a path to restitution. The hidden files were a weapon that had exposed a wound. Now I was using the same techniques to finally begin to heal it. My phone buzzed. It was a picture message from Jenna. She was sitting in a sunny park, a book in her lap, looking healthier and more relaxed than I'd seen her in years. The new treatment, fully funded by the preliminary asset seizure, was working. Under the photo, a simple message: "The world feels clean today." I stared at the screen, at the numbers and names, and then at her picture. I still hadn't told her the whole truth, that my work for Innovatech had inadvertently led me to the source of her illness. I didn't know if I ever could, but I could show her. I could take this skill, this curse that had once been my pride, and use it to rebuild the world Sterling had broken. I typed back a reply, my hands steady. It's a start. I look back at that deposition, at the man who called my sister a statistic, and I realize he made one fatal mistake. He saw the world as a spreadsheet. He thought he could delete a row, fudge a number, and the bottom line would be all that mattered. He never understood that behind every data point, there's a human story. My greatest skill, the one Innovatech paid me to use, was seeing those stories in the numbers. It's what allowed me to build a weapon out of the hidden files. And it's the skill I now use to heal the wounds they created. My life isn't quiet anymore. It's filled with phone calls from Sarah, strategy sessions with the DA, and late nights spent finding the ghosts in Innovatech's data, the other families, the other Jennas. The guilt I felt is still there, a quiet hum beneath the surface, but it's no longer a weight, it's fuel. It reminds me why this fight is so much bigger than just me. It's about making sure no corporation can ever again decide that a human life is a statistically acceptable risk. Sterling thought a lawsuit and a break-in would silence me. He thought threatening my sister would break me. Instead, he gave me a purpose. He showed me the true cost of silence. The road ahead is long, and the fight isn't over, not by a long shot. But for the first time since I walked out of Innovatech, I feel free. Not because I won a lawsuit, but because I found a truth worth fighting for. That's my story. From a simple data analyst to the man who held the key to bringing down a corrupt empire. It's a reminder that sometimes the smallest key can unlock the biggest cage. If you believe that truth needs a voice and power needs to be held accountable, and you want to follow the continuing fight for the families of East Milton, make sure you like and subscribe, because our work here is just getting started.